Custer. He is an example of an accomplished performer and pedagogue in music. So before you hear from him about his talk, I want you to enjoy a narrative about a successful career in music. Jerry is a multifaceted choral musician. He's an active as conductor, composer, author, clinician, and teacher. He earned the Bachelor of Music degree in choral music education at Westminster Choir College, a master's degree in orchestral conducting with additional work in historical musicology at the George Washington University, and the Doctor of Musical Arts in choral conducting at Michigan State University.
Bill Green.
He studied choral conducting with maestros Dennis Schrock, Joseph Fulmerfeld, and took part in master classes with Robert Shaw and William Ehrman. While an undergraduate, he served as assistant conductor of Westminster's Collegium Musicum and sang with Leonard Bernstein, Pierre Boulez, and William Steinberg, with the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and the Pittsburgh Symphony. While a graduate student, he founded and conducted the George Washington University Chamber of Singers and served as the associate conductor of the Alexandria Symphony Orchestra. For 10 years, Dr. Custer conducted the Arbor Concert, which is a chamber choir, which was a featured ensemble at the Michigan Renaissance Festival. He also served as interim conductor of the Saginaw Choral Society and directed choral activities at Schoolcraft College and Oakland Community College. He currently conducts the choral union at Wayne State University, where he also teaches music theory, composition, and graduate choral literature, and directs a multi-choir program and a performing arts series, presently in its 8th year at the First Presbyterian Church in Farmington Hills, Michigan. He is a Grammy-nominated, award-winning composer and arranger. He was a student of the late Malcolm Williamson. His work is featured in Inscape choral music by Gerald Custer, performed by the voices of Aman Kara, conducted by James Jordan, and as the title track of Innisfree choral music of Hope and Dreams by the same forces. He has written extensively for the choirs of Westminster Choir College and for numerous professional college and university choirs across the country. Recent commissions include work for the choir of Interlochen Arts Academy, a 4-movement choral symphony premiered at Carnegie Hall by the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra in New York, a setting of the Sabbat Mater Speciosa, premiered by members of the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra, and a large-scale work premiered by the University of Oklahoma Men's Glee Club and Percussion Ensemble. He has contributed chapters and music to both volumes of James Jordan's The Choral Rehearsal, and provided musical examples and performing editions for Dr. Jordan's Music for Conducting Study. He's the featured choral methods columnist for the GIA Quarterly, a publication read by over 25,000 musicians in the English-speaking world. He's a regular contributor to Bella Voce, the Choral Journal of the American Choral Directors Association and to other professional publications. Finally, he is the author of 2 landmark books in his field, The Composer's Craft, Practical Guidance for Teachers and Students, and From Words to Music, a User's Guide to Text for Choral Musicians. He's a nationally sought-after clinician. He was a featured artist last November for the 35th Annual Composers Festival at the First United Methodist Church in Birmingham, and recently completed his 2nd residency as guest composer and conductor at Montclair State University in New Jersey. So, you are in the presence of an outstanding musician, and had it not been so cold and miserable, I would have had to be standing out there and taking entrance. But you are the lucky ones. You're going to hear from this great man, free of cost. So please welcome to the podium Professor Gerald Custer, who will speak to us on words to music inside the Choral Composers Workshop. Welcome him with applause, please.
If you have not gotten coffee and munchies, please go get some right now, because I can't take them all back home to feed the birds. This is probably the only time I'll be allowed to actually eat and drink inside Shaver, which scares me no end. I'm delighted to be here, and grateful for that rather lengthy introduction, most of which was true. The ancient cartographers, hello, there they are, used to speak of terra incognita, the land unknown, the place where if the world were flat, you would fall off the edge in your ship and die. There be dragons there, you can't quite see it, but over just below the tail of the dragon, it says so. Hic cinque dragones. Here they are, here are dragons. I say this because I've told my students numerous times that being inside my head is a dangerous place to be. You don't want to hang out there very long. And I'm about to illustrate why, I suspect. I'm a choral conductor, as you heard, by training. I'm a choral composer strictly out of necessity and mostly cheapness. The first job I ever had when I got out of undergraduate school was as a full-time church musician in a little teeny Baptist church in Annandale, Virginia. I was a Roman Catholic at the time, and they were Southern Baptists. It was an interesting fit, as you can well imagine, for all concerned. The problem that I faced there was that they had an extensive choral library full of music that they loved to sing that I couldn't stand. They had 3 or 4 pieces that I liked a lot that they didn't want to sing and didn't have the ability to sing. And they had a budget to buy new music of absolutely 0. So out of desperation, I began to write pieces that they could stand to sing and I could stand to listen to. That's strictly why I became a composer, because I was too cheap to spend money I didn't have, and too desperate to sing music I didn't want to listen to. That's as inauspicious a beginning for a composer of choral music as probably anybody. I've spent a fair amount of time since then, that was 1975, writing choral music and conducting it, mostly conducting it, but occasionally writing it, and I'm very fortunate to find choirs that like to sing what I have to write. Choral music, however, is one of those things that if you think about it, doesn't immediately spring to the top of mind for what we think of as classical music. The Tchaikovsky Festival, is it done or is it almost done? Last weekend at the Tchaikovsky Marathon down at the DSO, I don't think it featured a single piece of music with text. And most of us, in fact, when we think of classical as a whole music, we don't think of music with words. Yet I spent most of my life writing just that. I've done other stuff as well, but most of my life is obsessed with text and meaning. And so I want to try to take you a little bit within the choral conductor's workshop where I live when I'm not teaching or conducting, to show you how it is I go about doing what I do. But first, for my students who are here, bless you, all of you, a quick word. My students don't read long emails. They read 140 characters. So here's a summary of today's talk, kids. Hashtag, words are good. matters, hashtag tell the story, and I'll see you at rehearsal at 1:20. So leave early to get there on time. Thank you. If there's a quiz, there are the answers, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a question. I believe that we are, by nature, answer-seeking, question-asking beings. All kinds of questions. Why am I here? Where am I going? Where did I come from? How did I get here? Why are things the way they are? Why is there air? Where do the stars go in the morning when the sun comes out? Why am I lonely? Why doesn't he call back the next morning? We are full of questions that don't easily get answered. And we seek to find answers to these questions, and long before there were words to write anything down, we began by telling stories. Storytelling is probably the most ancient communication art I know of. It's how we capture the truth as we understand it. It's how we pass along the truth as we understand it. Long before there was written language, there were stories and storytellers. Where do the stars go in the morning? Well, the sun puts them to bed, and the moon brings them out at night and wakes them up and sets them in the sky. Perfectly good answer to me. Works for me just fine. Why is the sky blue? Because it reflects the ocean, of course, don't you know? We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the world in which we live. And we pass those stories along, and we refine them as we go. Sometimes those stories turn into theories. Sometimes those theories are validated by experience and observation and become facts. We start with stories because we desperately want to know answers to the questions that nag at us. Choral music takes that powerful medium of storytelling and weds text to tone. It is one of the earliest and perhaps the most powerful ways we have to pass along the answers that we've managed to come up with across time. In almost every creation story that you look at, whether Jewish or otherwise, the divine beings, however many there are, or whatever you call them, seem to call the universe into being by song. When the morning stars together assembled and God sang them into being. This is part of our DNA, part of our mental heritage, and our cultural heritage that transcends West or East and goes back millions of years. Or if you prefer to go to the Creation Museum and ride the dinosaurs, thousands of years, but I digress. We tell stories and we put them to music because that's the easiest way to remember a story. When my children were very little, they learned all the capitals of the United States by singing a song. Some of you may have done that. My students probably did. Right? It's how we pass information along. We tell stories. So stories do this. They answer questions. They tell us who we are and where we've come from, and why we're here, and where we're going, and whether it means anything. And there are at least three things I want you to remember about stories, if nothing else in today's little talk. First of all, stories are always told for a reason, whether that's to educate, or inspire, or entertain, or challenge us. There's always a reason behind the story being told. We don't just do it to blather meaninglessly. They are always true. Whenever you tell a story, you need to believe it's true. Even if it's the dog ate my homework, or I was hiking the Appalachian Trail. At the moment, when you tell a story like that, you better believe it's going to communicate some kind of truth. Even liars believe their lies when they tell them. And finally, all stories are true, and some are factual. There are some stories that are bigger than truth, or bigger than fact, I should say. We call those myths. A myth is a story that is greater than truth. Two men were walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, or a man, was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. Once upon a time, there was a fox that wanted to grab the grapes, but they were too high for him to reach. All of the stories that we know that tell truth are true. Some of them are factual. Remember that as we go through this little talk, because I want you to appreciate that what I'm looking to find when I set a text is to suss out the truth of it and then respond to that truth as best I can through the medium of sound. Choral music, in the end, weds the power of text and truth-telling and storytelling to tone. It is neither one nor the other, but both and. The problem is this, that we as conductors and as composers generally don't have time to learn how to grapple with text. We worry about melody and counterpoint and harmony and history and performance practices and how to play our instruments well. And that's a pretty full curriculum for any music major. We don't generally have the luxury of dealing with literature the way that literary students do, who study text and syntax and genre and development and plot and all those items that to a novelist or a poet or a playwright are natural and customary. We just don't have the time to do that. And yet I have found that as a composer of texted music primarily, I have to grapple with text. The mathematician Pierre Heim, 20th century mathematician and epigrammist, once said, "Problems worthy of attack prove their worth by fighting back." In my experience, the better a text is, the more I have to grapple with it to discern and discover what it's really saying before I can respond to it appropriately as a composer. That's what I want to show you how I do in today's talk. So let's begin by talking about two classic approaches to telling story. The first one is the one you probably know the best. It's called the narrative arc. Every story, or almost every story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It starts somewhere, it goes somewhere else, and it returns. Musicians who are present, this is what modulation is all about. The further you go from home, the more powerful it is when you come back there. Every story, almost, has this shape, the narrative arc, is what we call it in literature. It starts from the Greeks, who didn't quite invent this approach, but certainly codified it early on, with a protagonist, a hero, if you will, usually found at home, happily puttering about, and for some reason or another, the hero leaves home and goes out into the big wide world and has adventures. The other word for adventures is conflict. They meet antagonists, people who oppose them, or situations that challenge them. This is because the Greeks believed, and I tend to agree with them, that conflict reveals character. You want to find out what somebody's like? Put them in a situation that challenges them. See what they're made of. See what they do. See how they respond. And at the end of the day, or the end of the story, the protagonist returns home, hopefully wiser, usually changed. This is the arc of many, many great stories, whether it's Adam and Eve in the garden, being thrown out and then coming back, maybe at the very end of all history, if you believe the biblical account. It's the same story that's told of the little hobbit in the Shire who goes out and takes a ring and drops it in a mountain of fire and comes back. It's the same story of a young man who decides to skip high school, phones in and pretends to be dying from kidney failure, borrows his best friend's father's car, goes to watch the Chicago Cubs and drive down a magnificent mile singing Donkey Shane on a float, and then goes back home. Whether it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off or The Lord of the Rings, most stories follow the same pattern. A beginning, a middle with challenges, and an end. That's one of the great overall meta forms for storytelling. And if you're a composer, that's really very useful because then you can write something in the beginning that matches something at the end and something quite different in the middle. It's those kind of cues, by the way, that composers respond to when they're dealing with text. There is another wonderful form called in medias res. I'll give you a classic example. Nel mezzo del cammin della nostra vita mi ritrovai da una selva oscura che la dritta via era smarrita, which of course you all know means in the middle of our life, I awoke from a deep sleep to find myself in a dark wood where no pathway out could be found. It starts the story not at the beginning, but in the middle, in medias res, in the midst of the thing, literally. These three lines are, of course, the opening canto of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, one of the great works of the Western canon of culture, and they speak to all of us. Did you ever awaken to find yourself lost? Suddenly you take your senses and realize you didn't know where you were or how you got there, and you weren't at all sure how to get out. I was telling a joke before our lecture began that I once had a dream that I was giving a lecture to a class, but I had fallen asleep, and I woke up and I found I was. I don't think Jeannie, I don't think you were there for that class. It's a good thing. But we all have moments like this, and that's the power of great text. It tells us something about what we are experiencing and tells us we're not the first or the last or the only person to experience it. That identification of our own experience with someone else's is part and parcel of what makes literature great and part and parcel of what makes choral music great if we do it right. But again, I need to be able to read into the text my own experience as well as read out of the text its message, if I'm going to make any sense of it at all, before I begin to respond to it musically. I've never said Dante's text, nor do I have any particular drive to do so right now. It's so far beyond me. But I suspect if I were to set this canto, I would start it with a lot of dark and rather dissonant and jumbled and disorganized sounds, things that don't play together nicely, to try to depict in some way what that emotion was like. This is part of what I do as a choral composer. I try to suss out not just the words, but the meaning that lives between them and behind them, and respond to that musically. There are all kinds of cues to which we can respond. Some of them are easy, some of them not so much. There are 5 key questions I ask with every text I set, and I find them terribly helpful. The first is author. Whose words are these in my mouth? Whose words are these going to be in the mouth of my singers and when they sing them? In choral union, for example, we're singing a lovely piece by Brahms, right? The Abschiedslied, Ich war bei dir, wenn es wohl sein. Whose words are they? What's the author like? What is he or she experiencing that causes him or her to utter these words? What happened before? What's going to happen afterwards? We can make some of that up, of course. But what is the author's character and life experience like that causes these words to be spoken? That's the first question. Author. Who speaks these words? The second one is audience, and it goes back to what I said a moment ago, that stories are always told for a reason. Who is the intended audience? Who are these words being spoken to? Are they being spoken to no one? Is it a soliloquy and you're just talking to yourself in the mirror? Hi, I love me. Oh, I love me too. Usually not. Usually we're talking to someone else. Who is that person? What are they waiting to hear? Are they going to like what we have to say? Or are they going to be challenged by it and discomforted by it? All of that will shape the kind of musical setting I'm going to propose for the text that follows. The third question is one of message. Not just who's speaking and who's hearing, but what's being said. What's at least the basic content? Is it a word of exhortation? Is it a word of challenge? Is it a command, thou shalt not? Is it something inspirational? Is it a declaration of love? Is it a revelation of fear or confusion? What's the message that's being sent? And what is the mood or the mode in which it's being spoken? Some of our messages have a particular emotional content. The mood: happy, glad, sad, mad, angry, confused, scared. What mode is it being spoken in? Is it poetic? Is it prose? And finally, what's the motive? Why am I saying these words to that person in this way? What's my reason? What's my motive? What's driving me? What's behind the words that's not being spoken that tells the real story? Rabbi Akiva, who was a contemporary of Paul of Tarsus back in the early days of the Christian era, once said that the words that are not spoken are more important than the words that are. And for all of us who read the language, it's finding out what's not said, but still meant. This is part of our work in grappling with text. This sounds like a lot of work to do before I write a single note. It is. It's also essential. If I'm going to dare to put anything on paper, it has to have some integrity and consonance with the text that I'm confronting. Hope that makes sense, because that's how I spend my time. Oops. Hello. There we are. A few more aspects of text, and I'm not going to give you a grammar lesson, I promise. There are lots of better books, including the one I wrote, that will do are a few. What's the nature of the address? Are we speaking to someone directly, or are we sort of walking around backwards? Here's a classic example. Direct address. A red Ferrari just hit my mother. Now for the record, my mother's fine. And I don't own a red Ferrari. I'm a musician after all. You can laugh, it's okay. Thank you. Indirect address. My mother just got hit by a red Ferrari. Direct or indirect address makes a big difference to me as a composer in terms of what kind of texture I write in, how many voices I use, how thick or thin the fabric musically is, how fast or slow it goes. Right? Voice is the second one, active or passive. Brutus stabbed Caesar. Pretty direct address. It happened. Indirect address. Caesar was stabbed by a red Ferrari. No, by Brutus. Right? Indirect address is a sneakier way to get a message across. It's going to require a certain kind of musical response on my part. A direct address is rather straightforward. It's right there. It's going to change the style of musical decision-making I make as a composer. And may I add, this is the same kind of analysis that I go through every time I analyze and prepare a piece of music to conduct. What kind of text are we dealing with? How does the composer respond to the text? I need to know that, guys, before I can stand in front of you and choral unit at 120 and talk about what kind of decisions we need to make in terms of tone, volume, weight, articulation, tempo, and all the rest. Right? This kind of analysis is part of what all choral musicians really need to do, whether as conductors or as composers. The tense is another question altogether. Did this event happen in the past? Is it happening now? Or is it something we think might happen in the future at some point? That's going to make a big difference in terms of the musical decisions I make as a composer. How fast, how slow, how thick, how thin, how much, how little. How loud, how soft. Music is meant to predict or to fantasize about the future or a different kind of gauziness, perhaps. Music of the past may have a more quiet, introspective, reflective feel to it. Music about the present, happening right now, is going to have a different color and a different quality altogether. And finally, density, which is one that I like to think about a lot, and a lot of folks don't think about. How many syllables per word in this text? Are most of the words polysyllabic, with lots of shape inside, or are they mostly monosyllabic? Syllabic density makes a big difference. Grammatic density makes a big difference. Hemingway once wrote a little epigram. Why did the chicken cross the road? To die. In the rain. Alone. Gerard Manley Hopkins, on the other hand, would have written 3.5 pages and invented 25 different words just to describe the same event. So the grammatical density of something can vary from one author to another. And again, there's a cue to which I respond as a composer. If I have syntactic density, is the speech straightforward, or is it in fact convoluted? Part of grammatic density, too, would be this. Some authors of text, poets in particular, specialize mostly in nouns and verbs, the bones of text, if you will. They don't dress them up very much. Others delight in adding word after word after word of modification, amplification, and other kinds of adjectives and adverbs. How dense is the grammar? How dense is the syntax? All of these are things that make a difference to me as a composer when I make musical decisions, or as a conductor when I look at somebody else's musical decisions. Here we go. No. Sorry, guys. There we are. A few other tricks of the trade that text writers love to play. Simile and metaphor. Simile says something's like something else. My love's like a red, red rose, says Bobby Burns. But if Bobby Burns were to say, my love's a red, red rose, he's uttered a metaphor and quality of two things that are not the same. To which I always say, really? It's a flower? Are you sure? We need to know what we're dealing with to be able to respond to it intelligently. Another aspect of text, especially older text, but even some more recent, is alliteration, where you have the same sound, if not the same letters, repeated on more, down the line in the text. One of my very favorite madrigals is by John Farmer. Fair Phyllis I saw sitting all alone. You can hear the FF, Fair Phyllis, saw sitting all alone, feeding her flocks near to the mountains. Interesting side note, we think that probably most of the Brits that sang Farmer's music in the late Renaissance and madrigal era probably had bad teeth. Maybe a lot of them were missing their front teeth, and so very likely that particular madrigal was actually sung, Fair Phyllis I saw sitting all alone. I'm not making this up. There are scholarly articles that I have not written about this very topic. And finally, repetition. Some poets, Walt Whitman, love repetition. Out of the cradle, endlessly rocking, out of the mockingbird's throat, and on he goes. That wonderful pages of into the. That suggests something to me as a composer. If there's a repeated piece of text, I may want to respond to it with the same or similar music to grab some kind of unity within all the diversity of the text that I'm setting. And then there's some other things as well. Rhyme scheme, sketch, and how many syllables per line, whether the ends of each line of text rhyme or every other line. You can look all those up in a good poetry textbook, and they'll tell you about it in great detail. And finally, formal organization. There are certain forms like the sonnet. And there are two different kinds of those, right? The Italianate and the Elizabethan, where you have to find where the idea turns around in the middle of it. Sestinas, and my favorite form, the limerick, which is a very condensed and very tightly organized bit of poetic form. I will now recite my favorite limerick. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I fight to the finish, but I eat my spinach. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. It's a limerick. It sets itself very nicely musically in a short form. There are many other tricks of the trade that authors use. These are the primary ones that I respond to as hooks. I want to give you two examples of what this process looks like. Here's one. This is a poem by the great Irish playwright and patriot and poet William Butler Yeats called The Lake Isle of Innisfree. Innisfree is a real place. It really exists. It's a little tiny island in the middle of Lochdair, Lake Derg, in Ireland. It's where Yeats and his family spent their summers. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree in a small cabin built there of clay and wattles. Wattles are mud dogs, essentially, made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. Linnet is a small bird, like a thrush or a sparrow. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Magnificent poem. Yeats was living at this time in London, and he was standing, by all accounts, in front of a shop window in one of the high streets in London, and it was gray and rainy, and he felt utterly alone. And suddenly, as he stared at his reflection in the window, he was transported. He could see and smell and hear and feel a place altogether different than where it presently was. He was back home. This is a marvelous piece of poetic craft. When I look at the density of this poem, for example, I notice that nearly all of the words are monosyllables. There are a few: arise, cabin, wattles, dropping. Oh, sorry about that. Get rid of that. That are monosyllabic, or that are polysyllabic. The vast majority, yes, there we are. The vast majority of the words are monosyllabic. There is one word that has 3 syllables, and it's used once. It is 3. The title of the poem, the location about which all of this is being written. That's going to suggest to me some certain decisions I'm going to make to set this piece. I'm not going to engage in a lot of hyperbole musically. I'm not going to take a note and give it 10 or 12 different pitches to sing. I'm going to try to match the simplicity of the text with my simplicity of setting that text. There is one other piece of craft in this poem that's absolutely astonishing to me. You may notice it as you scan the poem. He's not in the present when he starts this poem. I will arise. I will do it. I will do it. 9 bean rows. By the way, 9 bean rows to an Irishman means something. It means I have enough food to sustain my life. 9 rows of beans is plenty to eat in Ireland of the late 19th century. Not everybody had that in Irish history. And live alone in the be loud lady. I have both bean rows, giving me beans to eat, and honey, so I have something sweet in my life. He continues in the future tense, and I shall have, some piece there. I will arise and go now for always night and day, and then comes the turn. I hear lake water loud. He suddenly, simply, without any fanfare, brings you into the present moment. It's a magnificent piece of poetic craft. All of a sudden, it's not the future is here, and I'm in it. I'm not here anymore, I'm really there. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement spray, not I will hear it, or I shall hear it. I hear it in the deep heart's core. This is a poem about finding a place where you are truly at home, where all is peaceful and safe, where your needs are met, where you know who you are. Some of us already know where home is. Some of us have no idea where home is. We're still looking for it. Some of us perhaps don't even harbor the hope that we'll ever find home. All of those levels of meaning in your life and my life can be read into and onto this text. Here's how I responded to that musically. I'll leave the poem up so you can listen to the musical setting. a text that begins to echo the opening of the poem. So as you might expect, so does the music. Same gesture. So that's one composer's response to a text and the dance that comes as a result of thinking it through. There are other lovely settings in that text, by the way. Mine is far from the only one. But all I can say is that's my response to a text, as I said. Here's a different one altogether to finish up with. Here's a sonnet by John Donne. Batter my heart, three-personed God. For you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek command, that I may rise and stand, or throw me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn. See all that alliteration? Love it. And make me new. I, like a usurped town to another Jew, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your viceroy me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. And like any sonnet, there's always a turn. That's the problem. Here's the solution. Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except your enthralling, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. John Donne is a fascinating poet to set, not just because his works are not under copyright. Thank you for that. John Donne began his life as a Roman Catholic. In fact, one of his relatives was married to Sir, or Saint, depending on your persuasion, Thomas More, who had his head removed from his shoulders by Henry VIII. He had a rather wild and licentious life. His parents both died while he was still a student. He spent most of his inheritance on wine, women, and song across most of Europe. Came back to England penniless and experienced a religious conversion. Became an Anglican, or a member of what we would call the Episcopal Church here in the States. Was ordained priest, and his career culminated in being the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. It's a very high honor to be the Dean of St. Paul's, second really only to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Toward the end of his life, he wrote a number of prayers in the sonnet form. And like a lot of metaphysical poets, look at how much conflict you find in this. Here's a man making a prayer to his God, three-person God, and he's asking that God not to comfort him, but to wreak violence on him. Look at all the violent verbs you see. Batter my heart, break, blow, burn. Here's a man in mortal anguish, cognizant of how far from the God he serves and loves he truly is. And he's desperately pleading to please have his life changed somehow. Not by his own efforts, but by some kind of infusion of divine power, by grace, by whatever you want to call it. And so the disconnects are amazing. He says, I love you, but I'm married to my enemy. So divorce me, or make me yours again. Untie me. Put me in prison where I can love you purely and fully. I will never be free unless I am your prisoner. I will never be pure unless you ravish me. That's pretty powerful language. And all of those verbs are things that I responded to in setting the text. You'll hear some unification of ideas as well, from beginning to end. This is a performance of this piece by our own concert chorus. My favorite living prophet is a man by the name of Leonard Cohen. He's a poet from Canada, and at the end of one of his best-known songs, Anthem, he has these words. You can see them up there. Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. We are all broken people, I suspect. I know I am. I'm surrounded by it in my choirs and the people driving on the highway with me, people standing in front of me at Kroger's. We're all broken. That's okay. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Mathematics teaches us to reason. Science explains how things work the way they do. History tells us how we got here. But it's the humanities, the arts, that teach us how to feel, show us names for the things we feel. Answers are whys. How did I get it? Why am I? Where am I? If there is anything more important than that, I pray God somebody tells me about it before I die. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I appreciate you being here.
There's also two questions, so if you have a question or two.
A question or two. I'm 2 minutes late to a rehearsal, but that's okay. Don't wait for me. You won't be up there. Sure, a quick question to do is fine. Which, for me, words always first. I always find texts first. I have a room full of poetry that I go through. So for me, words first. That's just how it works for me.
And you also write text yourself?
I do. Although I try not to impose too much of that on my audiences, but I have been known to commit poetry on a rare occasion. But for me, it's the power of text and the engagement with another human experience that's the fertile ground for me as a composer, out of which comes my response. So it's a dialogue, it's a hermeneutic, if you will.
That's how we write songs as well.
I think it's for a lot of us. Now, often I'll have an experience, have a mood or an emotional encounter, and then I will look for the right text that encapsulates that and then respond to it.
Okay.
So often for me, it's lived experience, find the text that says that best, try to set the text as worthily and as honestly as I can. That's how it works for me.
Wonderful job.
Oh, thank you
so much.
Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.